and grill in the parking lot. Within an hour, the place was filled with people, sharing food, stories, music, and laughs. It was amid catastrophe that we all found a bit of stability and community. 3 days after Harvey, my fiancé and his friends secured a boat and headed out in his truck, trying for days to get people out of the flooding. After the waters receded, we once again grabbed our barbecue pit, meat, cases of water, and clothes and set up at the local grocery store, ready to distribute emergency items to affected families. People from all over the neighborhood came by, some to collect, others to give. Tracy, a mother who lost everything, came to get supplies for herself and her 3 children. She asked me if we'd be back tomorrow. I said we would, and that I'd put some more items aside for her family. "No, I'll be back tomorrow to volunteer," she said. Harvey spared no one. The wealthy were impacted just as heavily as the impoverished. If I could change one thing about how Hurricane Harvey was handled in Houston, it would be that everyone in areas hit by the hurricane would have received some financial aid following the storm. Now, months later, there are still many Houstonians homeless and fighting with insurance companies, receiving denials from FEMA after losing everything they'd owned. Many people's homes were flooded, forcing them to evacuate, and those whose homes incurred minimal structural damage found that roadways to commute to work were inaccessible, causing them to lose wages and the ability to pay for basic utilities, food, and shelter. These individuals still find themselves digging out of a hole. When I was a child, my family struggled with the weight of poverty. We lived in homeless shelters, received food from neighborhood pantries, and clothing from local donation sites. Every step of the way, there were volunteers from within our community donating, facilitating, and supporting us. I decided as a child that helping others was what I wanted to do with my life. Before Harvey, I thought the only way to get to that point was to get my degree and start a nonprofit organization. Harvey showed me that each and every one of us can start where we are. There is no degree for kindness, compassion, and support.
As wildfires raged all over Northern California, we at the Napa FFA, Future Farmers of America, an agricultural science program, had been rescuing animals. On Tuesday, October 10, around 6 p.m., we evacuated horses from an area that was on fire. Moving quickly, we hauled our way up a hill in trucks with horse trailers thumping behind us. As we continued to ascend, we could feel the intense heat. Fires burned alongside the road as we reached the stable. I jumped out of the truck and raced toward a young horse that didn't have much experience being loaded into a trailer. After a couple of failed attempts, we were able to convince him to follow us in. We loaded several other horses into the trailer and fled just as the fire closed in. We were able to get them to safety. The following days were a blur between evacuating more animals and gathering supplies. We also had been checking the animals' temperatures, pulses, and respiration rates. Many of us stayed on site in sleeping bags and were glad to provide shelter for the animals who had none. The reality of natural disasters is that no matter where you are, one can occur at any time, whether that be tornadoes in the Midwest or earthquakes on the West Coast. I want to live my life not in fear of such events, but with the knowledge that I am prepared to face them head-on after my experience. To see my friends spend their days and nights with me at the vintage farm where we brought the evacuated animals is the most humbling experience I have ever been part of. It had been interesting to watch the blackened hills around Napa start to turn green again as the West Coast entered winter. The farm is still home to 6 little goats as their new home is being built. But all other rescues were able to either return to their homes or found new, permanent ones.
Because I'm from Florida originally, I've seen my share of hurricanes. They've always reminded me of a time when the family gets together, has some snacks, and plays some board games. But talking to my parents who had retired to Puerto Rico a few years ago, this time was different. They were fearful. I could hear it in my dad's voice during our final phone conversation. "We are FC kid," he said, laughing. As the storm approached, I kept messaging my dad. "Nothing yet," he would reply. "A little rain." But the next morning, there were no new messages. I called every number I knew beginning with 787, and they all went straight to voicemail. I couldn't think of anything but all the possible scenarios. For days I watched the news, checked my social media, anything I could get my hands on. As the days passed, more and more word came in. And still, nothing from my parents. 3 days later, my cousin in Tampa texted to say that my parents were well. My grandfather had driven to my parents to check on them, then gone to my aunt's house, who was able to call her son. who then called my cousin. 2 days later, I arranged a call with my cousin. She patched us through, and as soon as I heard my dad's voice, I fell apart. My mom said it looked like the apocalypse. In a later call, my dad said that in his 70 years, he'd never been so scared. The wind shook their concrete house, howling like a possessed spirit. The lines to get a bag of ice were hours long. Gasoline could not be found, and people's homes were now just hollowed-out skeletons. But they were fine, he said. We have a little water from the tank. We have food, and most importantly, we have family. The connection started getting fuzzy. We exchanged I love yous. I got off the phone and crumpled to the ground, exhausted. Since the hurricane, I've been speaking to aid workers, and the island, sadly, has yet to rehabilitate. A lot of the island is still in the dark, and many people in the mountainous towns remain without running water. Supermarkets are closing their doors permanently, and the ones that remain open have rotting meat and smells that cannot be described. One of the major problems Puerto Ricans have encountered is that whatever was fixed was quickly washed away by more rain. FEMA and other agencies are still in the band-aid stage, when we are already at the 4-month mark, and we are still suffering as if the storm passed only days ago. Many people on the island aren't aware of the suffering occurring near them in towns that are only 15 to 20 minutes away. I'm terrified of another storm passing through because we have yet to rebuild from this one. Most importantly, people are not mentally ready to take on another storm, as many survivors are reportedly experiencing PTSD. Business may be back, but jobs aren't. I ask myself, how is it possible that people are still lacking basic needs, and these American citizens were ignored? However, when I have visited the poorest places and asked how people are, they always replied, "We're alive."
I wasn't expecting this to happen. I was in class when suddenly the first thing that I felt was like a huge truck passing by. My desk raised from the floor like it was jumping. I was very upset because the alarm didn't ring, and the first movement was really strange. I didn't realize the building was shaking until after the movement continued, and one of my classmates shouted, "It's shaking." We all quickly got up and threw our desks and everything else out of the way to hurry out of the room. In the street, I went to the spot where they told us it was safe. Everything was still shaking, and the parked cars were all crashed into each other. People were running from their homes and offices. When it began to calm down and I made my way home, a classmate in our class group chat texted that a kindergarten building got knocked down and the little kids were trapped inside. Immediately, I put on some jeans and tennis shoes and headed over. I had to walk since the bus and train weren't working, and the streets were full of cars and people walking. Everywhere, traffic lights were not functioning. By the time I arrived at the kindergarten, they had rescued all the kids, and everyone was safe. We stayed in the streets with the children until their parents came to pick them up. After that, I came back to my house. My dad was concerned the whole time I was out in the streets because of the danger. I continue to volunteer when they need me, but the important thing you need to know is that there were many people helping all over the city. I loved meeting people with beautiful hearts, and I was reminded in my life to be grateful for my 2 arms and legs, instead of all the material things I used to value. I understand that life can take everything away in seconds, leaving you to start from scratch. The important part now is helping those affected. I don't think myself or anyone can ever be completely prepared for events like this, but seeing how many people volunteered selflessly in times of need is inspiring. It's made me realize, and I hope others, to always remain united and appreciate what we have every single day.
These stories highlight the resilience of those affected by natural disasters and the importance of continued support. While we can't control these events, we can ensure our communities are prepared, empowered, and ready to help each other. Thank you for watching. Remember, your support can make a long-term difference. Stay informed, stay involved, and together we can help rebuild lives.